Welcome everybody to the Monday Response, where I take a few comments from my last video and respond to them in a video. Let's get into the first comment. Sean Hoffman Meyer says, name a single church father who outlines this standard that you can start a new organization if you're excommunicated / anathematized. So this is technically a hidden question fallacy. My position is not that you start a new church if you're excommunicated. My position is that if you are excommunicated for the truth, you really weren't the one excommunicated. Let me explain. Let's say there's two factions within the church, faction A and faction B. Let's say that faction A excommunicates faction B for being Trinitarians, and faction A is Unitarians. Which one is really the one being excommunicated? Faction A might be doing the act of excommunication. They might be proclaiming faction B heretical and they're excommunicating them, but they're also heretics. They're wrong. They're not true believers. Essentially, what I'm saying by using the standard of excommunication for when you can leave a church is that if you are excommunicated for teaching the truth, they're essentially fixing the issue. They're fixing the problem. The people doing the excommunication in this case are cutting themselves off from Christian orthodoxy. They're no longer in the faith. Oh, that means you can start a new church? No, you're not starting a new church. You're continuing the church because the people that are heretics cut themselves off from you. They excommunicated themselves. Now, the PCA, they're not heretics, but they did cut themselves off, which is something that the heretics really should be doing if you are the one that holds the truth. If the liberal heretics in the PCUSA excommunicated all the conservative Orthodox Christians en masse, they would be leaving the church. That would be them saying, we're done, goodbye. That wouldn't be us starting a new church. Does the RPCNA count as mainline? I know that Redeemed Zoomer sometimes says that the RPCNA is technically mainline because they never split off from anyone. I don't really personally think the RPCNA is a mainline. I wouldn't say that they have proper jurisdiction. The reason why is because if you look at their history, they came over here, and no, technically they didn't split off from anybody, but they did plant a church in a jurisdiction that already had a Presbyterian church. It already had a church in it. So the jurisdictional claim of the RPCNA is much weaker than the PCUSA. I recommend you go PCUSA if you want to be a faithful Presbyterian in the United States. RSM 1689 says PCUSA is an apostate church. So I get this comment all the time. The PCUSA isn't an apostate church by any real standard that you can apply to it. Now, you can say that there's apostasy within the PCUSA, but Presbyterians, I can see that you're 1689 Baptist. Presbyterians have always believed that the visible church, the institutional church on earth, is a mixture of the invisible church, which is the true bride of Christ, really like spiritually united to Christ, and false believers. That is something that is very visible in the PCUSA. It's very apparent when you look at it, but it's not like the whole church. What makes this a really problematic claim to make, and it's made all the time, especially by the OPC and the PCA, is that there's hundreds of thousands of faithful believers in the PCUSA and thousands of elders and ministers that are preaching the gospel from the pulpit. You might not agree with everything they say, but that doesn't make them apostate. And so to take the word apostasy and apply it to a whole church that has faithful Christians in it, that's really unbecoming of Christian charity and honestly really mean and nasty. And anyone who thinks this way, I think, should repent of slander because it really is nasty behavior and there is hatred in your heart. So I'm just saying that in love. I wouldn't say that if I didn't think it was true. Believe me, but I do think it is true. Anyone who makes this claim needs to stop. Emmanuel says, my main issue with the Reconquista is its attempt to save the ELCA rather than encourage people to join churches like the LCMS, which existed before the ELCA. So, number one, it's not how old the church is, it's the church's jurisdictional claim in the United States. And I could do a whole nother video on jurisdiction. If you want to learn more about jurisdiction, I recommend Young Anglican's video called I Was Wrong. He explains jurisdiction at length from an Anglican perspective, but it's really just a Protestant idea that a church being started in a new land or a new country, that church has jurisdiction in that country. Because of the way America was settled in kind of different colonies, both of these churches have a jurisdictional claim in the United States. I think the problem that my commenter here has is that the LCMS is clearly faithful conservative mainline church, probably the most conservative mainline church in the United States, while the ELCA is very liberal and has lots of issues. The reason why we do encourage people to go to the ELCA and try to reform it is because the ELCA is not without lots and lots of American Lutheran heritage. So if you care about the Lutheran heritage in America, go try to revive the ELCA. If you really just can't be part of a liberal church and you can't stomach it, then stay in the LCMS. I would not say that you're sinful for being in the LCMS. The LCMS is a good, faithful, mainline church, and I am happy to recommend people go to it. But I also think that Lutherans should go ELCA if they have an ELCA church next to their house. Strengthen that church, call it back to orthodoxy, and reform it. Y'all Quiet and Down says, so if they lift the anathema, will you go to Roman Catholicism? It's an interesting question, but it's a little bit more complicated than just a simple yes. Now, I'm inclined to say yes, because we did come from Roman Catholicism, and the argument that we normally make is we didn't leave Roman Catholicism as Protestants until they placed this anathema on us. The problem is Roman Catholicism has changed so much. The authority and the claim to authority the Pope has expanded. There's also been dogmas that have been proclaimed by the Catholic Church that are binding on Catholics. So essentially what would happen is if they were to lift the anathemas on Protestants, they would essentially be kind of becoming Protestant. Because number one, they'd have to admit that the Pope does not have this sort of infallible, supreme authority over the church that they say that he has, such that it's not binding on the members of the Catholic Church to affirm that, which right now it is. And they would also have to admit that the church itself can err, which is a Protestant way to think. Also, I wonder what that would do to jurisdiction, because Protestants have a view of jurisdiction that's very national. It's kind of similar to Eastern Orthodoxy, whereas Roman Catholics, they believe jurisdiction is global and it's central to Rome, and it extends all over the entire earth under the papacy. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm inclined to say yes. I've said kind of rhetorically before, if Roman Catholics lifted the anathema, I would sign up for OCIAs tomorrow. But also, I think that it's more complicated than that. Common objections to mainline Protestantism: fake and gay. Definitely not fake. Maybe a little bit gay, but we're trying to fix the gayness. We're trying to get that out of the church. Guys, if your church has gayness, don't leave the church, because you're just making the church more gay. Stay in the church, keep it less gay, and fight for getting the gayness straightened out. This is the last comment I'm going to talk about. Tyler, very good name by the way, said, overall, very good video. However, I would just add that although objection 5 is correct in the sense that you're correctly defining what the marks of the church are and how the test is to be used, but where your argument breaks down is in the idea that church discipline doesn't exist outside mainline churches. Just as much as you can church hop when excommunicated from a non-denominational or schismatic church, you can also church hop when excommunicated from a mainline Protestant church. Not to mention, mainline churches rarely, if ever, excommunicate people to begin with. I think there's a slight misunderstanding of what I was saying in objection 5 there in my last video. Go check out my video. It's called The Internet Was Wrong About Mainline Protestantism, and you'll understand what we're talking about by objection 5. My contention is not that you can go church hop if, like, let's say, for example, if your church says you're under discipline, you can just say, well, I don't care, and you can go to another church. You can do that. What I'm saying is, based on my mainline Protestant ecclesiology, I can't do that and be a faithful Christian. Whereas in the OPC and the PCA, because of the way they were founded, or non-denominational churches or independent Baptist churches or what have you, because of the way their churches were founded and because of their ecclesiology, it's totally, you can be faithful and do that. That one church might not think that you're faithful, but there's nothing in their founding and in their ecclesiology that says that you're not. The OPC already did that. The PCA already did that. They cut themselves off from the church. So what's saying that if they exercise church discipline on someone, like let's say they defrock a pastor for saying that females can be ordained, which is something that the OPC would probably do, what's saying that they can't just go find a church that can do that? Because they have this schismatic understanding of the church where the church is just wherever we have something that looks like Presbyterianism. Okay, so that's my contention. I'm not saying that I can't do that. I'm saying that I can't do that based on my ecclesiology, which I believe is correct, and remain a faithful Christian. But they can do that based on their ecclesiology. So my ecclesiology is better. Thank you guys for tuning into this video. I hope you have a wonderful week. Please be on the lookout for my next video, which is going to be on raising children in the mainline churches. I'm very excited about that video. Please subscribe and hit the notification button so that you get notified when that video is released. Have yourself a very nice day.